The ringtone cut through the hum of the tires, loud and shrill in the enclosed space of the Bentayga. Julian didn't even glance at the dashboard screen. He just sighed, that specific annoyed sigh he reserves for other people's emergencies, and jabbed the accept button on the steering wheel. "What?" he said. Not hello, just what? I was staring at the blur of the rain-streaked window, counting the miles back to the city. 20 minutes, maybe less if he sped. The aftertaste of expensive champagne and Julian's ego still sat heavy on my tongue from the dinner in the Hamptons. Some developer he'd never heard of had tried to pitch him a project, and Julian had spent 40 minutes explaining why the guy was an idiot. I'd tuned out, focusing on the weight of the diamond on my finger, a gift for our 2-year anniversary. 2 years and 3 days, to be exact. Julian? Julian, is that you? The voice on the other end wasn't the crisp, professional tone of a colleague. It was Natalie. Her voice was thick, deliberately shaky, the way it got when she wanted something, or when she wanted him to think she needed something. Julian's grip tightened on the wheel. I saw his knuckles go white. Nat, what's wrong? I didn't turn my head. I didn't need to see his face to know the shift in his posture. I'd seen it enough times over the past 2 years. The way his whole body leaned toward the sound of her voice, like a plant turning to the sun, or maybe a moth to a flame. Either way, I was just the inconvenient shadow in the passenger seat. My car just died, she whispered, a dramatic, wet whisper, right in the middle of I-95. There's a truck behind me, and the guy, he's out, walking toward me. Julian, I'm scared. I rolled my eyes. It was a habit I'd picked up recently, a defense mechanism. Natalie's car never died. It was a vintage Porsche 911 that Julian paid to have maintained every month. I knew, because the invoices came to our home office. I was the one who signed the checks he didn't bother looking at. Call 911. Natalie, I said, my voice flat. I didn't raise it. I just said it into the space between them, a bucket of cold water on their little drama. Julian shot me a look, a sharp, cutting look that told me to shut up without him having to waste breath. Then he focused back on the phone. Stay on the line, baby. I'm coming. Julian, we're 20 minutes from the city, I said, keeping my tone even, reasonable, the way you talk to someone who's lost their grip on reality. Call roadside assistance, or the state police. They can be there in 5. Turning around will add 40 minutes to. She's bleeding. Sienna. He said it so fast, so definitively, that for half a second I actually believed him. My stomach dropped. Bleeding? How? Then I heard it. The tiniest, most perfectly timed hitch in Natalie's breathing on the speaker. A little gasp, like she'd just been reminded of her own fabricated injury. Bleeding from what? Julian? I asked, turning to face him now. The interior of the car smelled like his cologne and the leather seats. She hasn't mentioned hitting anything, just a dead battery and a creepy trucker. His jaw clenched. Move, he said. It took me a second to process. What? I said move. Sienna, get in the back seat. I need to turn this car around. I laughed, a short, dry sound that had no humor in it. You're not serious. We're on I-95, in the rain, at 11 o'clock at night. You're going to pull a U-turn on a highway to go play knight in shining armor for your ex-girlfriend who's suddenly bleeding. Get in the back seat. His voice was low, dangerous, the voice he used in boardrooms when he wanted to intimidate someone smaller than him. It didn't work on me anymore. It hadn't worked in months. No, I said, pull over. Let her call a tow truck like every other adult in America. He didn't argue again. He just yanked the wheel hard to the right, the car swerving onto the shoulder, the tires kicking up gravel and spray. The momentum slammed me against the door. Before the car fully stopped, he was already reaching across me, his forearm pressing against my collarbone, unlocking my door. Get out, he said. I stared at him, Rain lashed against the windows, blurring the world outside into streaks of black and white. Inside, the only light was the dim glow of the dashboard, painting his face in harsh shadows. He looked like a stranger. No, not a stranger. He looked like a man who'd finally stopped pretending to care what I thought. Julian, I don't have time for this, he snarled. He leaned over further, his shoulder jamming into my ribs as he shoved the door open. Cold air and rain blasted into the car. She's bleeding. Sienna, move. He wasn't asking. He was telling. And the worst part was, he expected me to obey, like a dog being ordered off the couch. I looked at his face, at the absolute certainty in his eyes that I would just step out into the pouring rain on a dark highway because he commanded it, because Natalie, the woman he supposedly left 3 years ago, was more important than the one he vowed to protect. So I moved. I unbuckled my seatbelt. The latch clicked loudly in the sudden silence. I swung my legs out, my heels sinking into the muddy gravel of the shoulder. The rain hit me instantly, soaking my hair, my dress, the thin wrap I'd grabbed at the last minute. It was freezing, the kind of wet cold that gets into your bones in seconds. I stood up, leaning against the side of the car. Julian didn't look at me. He was already shifting into drive, his hand reaching for the door to pull it shut. Julian, I said. My voice was steady, calmer than I felt. Don't do this. He paused. For a fraction of a second, his eyes met mine in the side mirror, and in that reflection, I saw it. Not regret, not guilt, just irritation. Irritation that I was making this harder than it needed to be. She needs me, he said, and then he slammed the door. The car pulled away, the red glow of the taillights receding into the storm. Within 10 seconds, he was gone, just gone. The roar of the engine faded, leaving me alone with the sound of the rain and the occasional whoosh of a passing semi-truck that didn't seem to notice the woman standing on the shoulder. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just stood there, dripping, and reached into the tiny excuse for a pocket in my silk dress. My phone was still there. I pulled it out, the screen glowing bright in the darkness. It was water-resistant. Thank God for small mercies. I opened my messages. My best friend, Chloe, was still in our thread from earlier in the evening. Me, he chose her. 3 dots appeared almost immediately. Chloe was a night owl, and probably a mind reader, because she replied before I could type another word. Chloe again? I stared at that word. Again. Not are you okay? Not what happened. Just again. Because this wasn't the first time. It was just the first time he'd done it. So publicly. So blatantly. So permanently. I typed back, my thumbs moving slowly, deliberately. Me, on I-95, in the rain. He pushed me out and left. Chloe, I'm calling the state police. Non-emergency line. I'll give them your location. Don't move. Me, too late. He already did. Chloe, Sienna, I mean you don't move. Stay on the phone with me. Please. I looked up and down the highway. One direction was a solid wall of blackness. The other had a faint orange glow from a distant exit sign. I could walk. I could start walking and keep walking until I found a payphone. Did those still exist? Or a gas station? Or I could wait. I waited. About 10 minutes later, the flashing blue and red lights of a state trooper's SUV pulled up behind me. The officer, a tall guy with a salt and pepper mustache and a name tag that read Miller, approached cautiously. Ma'am, you okay? Dispatch said you were stranded. I turned to face him. Rain ran down my face, mixing with the mascara I hadn't bothered to wipe away. I probably looked like a drowned raccoon, or a scorned wife. Same difference. I'm fine, officer, I said. My teeth were starting to chatter. He frowned, looking past me at the empty highway. Who drove off and left you here? My husband, I said. The word tasted like ash. Julian Voss. Recognition flickered in his eyes. Everyone in the tri-state area knew the name Julian Voss. real estate mogul, philanthropist, total asshole. Apparently, Mr. Voss left you on the shoulder of I-95 in a downpour? Miller asked slowly, like he was trying to make sense of it. Do you want to press charges? Or at least file a report for reckless endangerment? I looked at the glowing screen of my phone. A new notification had popped up. A banking app. Not the joint account Julian checked obsessively. Another one. An account with a number so long it had its own area code. An account Julian didn't know existed. An account my mother had set up for me 20 years ago. Funded by a trust he couldn't touch. Even with the prenup we'd signed, the balance on the screen was substantial. Enough to buy the building Julian's company was currently leasing. Enough to buy the land under it. Enough to buy and sell Julian Voss about 50 times over. I looked back at Officer Miller. He was waiting for an answer. A way to help. A chance to bring a powerful man down a peg. It would be so easy to say yes. To let the system handle it. To watch Julian get hauled in for questioning. His perfect hair mussed. His $1,000 suit wrinkled. But that would be too quick. Too easy. Where was the satisfaction in a misdemeanor charge? Where was the lesson in a slap on the wrist? I shook my head. A slow, deliberate movement. Not yet. Miller looked confused. Not yet, ma'am. He left you here. That's not just rude. That's dangerous. You could have been hit by a car. Or gotten hypothermia. I'm aware, I said. My voice was steadier now. Colder. But I'd like to handle this myself. He hesitated, then nodded, clearly deciding I wasn't a threat to myself or others. Just a weirdly calm victim of a rich jerk. Okay, at least let me give you a ride to the nearest station. You can call someone from there. Thank you, I said. I climbed into the warm, dry back seat of the cruiser. As Miller closed the door, I looked out the window at the spot where Julian had abandoned me. The rain was still falling, but I couldn't feel it anymore. I opened my messages again. This time, I scrolled past Chloe to a contact listed simply as Eleanor. Eleanor Vance, my mother's oldest friend, the woman who managed the trust, the woman who'd told me 2 years ago, on my wedding day, you'll know when it's time, Sienna, and when you do, call me. I started typing. Me, Eleanor. It's time. I need the paperwork for the full asset release. I hit send. Then I leaned my head back against the headrest and closed my eyes. Julian thought he was leaving me on the side of the road. He thought he was choosing Natalie. He thought he was putting me in my place, a place he decided was small and quiet and dependent on him. He was wrong. He hadn't left me behind. He'd just cleared the path ahead of me, and for the first time in 2 years, I could finally see where I was going. The highway went both ways. Julian, you just drove off in the wrong direction, and I was about to make sure you never found your way back. The town car Eleanor sent didn't arrive until almost 2 a.m. I'd spent the last hour in the back of Miller's cruiser, wrapped in a scratchy gray blanket, fielding calls from Julian that I let go straight to voicemail. 7 calls, 3 texts, all variations of where are you, and don't be dramatic, and, finally, answer the phone. Sienna. I didn't answer. I just watched the blinking cursor on my banking app until the sleek black sedan pulled up. The driver, a stone-faced guy named Ray who'd worked for Eleanor longer than I'd been alive, held the door open without a word. He didn't ask why I was wet or why I was barefoot or why I was getting into his car at a state police barracks in Westchester County at 2 a.m. He just handed me a fresh pair of cashmere socks and a bottle of San Pellegrino and drove. By the time we pulled up to the limestone facade of our 5th Avenue building, the sky was that bruised purple color that comes right before dawn. Julian's Bentayga was already parked crookedly in the private motor court, taking up 2 spots. Typical. Ray didn't follow me in. He just gave me a nod and said, Ms. Vance asked me to remind you. The clock starts ticking the moment you walk through that door. I knew what he meant. The prenup. the clause about separation, the trust. Every tick of the grandfather clock in the foyer was a dollar sign adding itself to my column. The elevator ride up to the penthouse was silent, too silent. I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. I stepped out into the private vestibule, my key fob feeling heavier than usual. I didn't bother being quiet. I let the door click shut behind me with a definitive thunk. The lights in the living room were on. Low, but on. Julian was sprawled on the sectional, still in his tuxedo shirt, but the bow tie was gone, the top two buttons undone, and Natalie was curled into his side, wearing one of my cashmere robes. The sight of it, my robe, her body, his arm around her, should have been a punch to the gut. Instead, it felt like a piece clicking into place. They both looked up. Natalie's eyes were red-rimmed, her dark hair a mess around her face. She'd perfected the just cried look. Julian's expression was a mixture of exhaustion and irritation, the latter aimed squarely at me. "Where the hell have you been?" he asked, sitting up. Natalie whimpered and tucked her head deeper into his chest. He stroked her hair, automatically. "I've been calling you for hours." I walked to the wet bar, my bare feet silent on the heated marble floors. I poured myself 2 fingers of Macallan, not because I wanted it, but because I needed something to hold, something to keep my hands from shaking. I was on the side of I-95. "Julian," I said, my voice flat. "Remember? You put me there." Natalie lifted her head, her bottom lip trembling. "Sienna, I'm so sorry. If I'd known he'd—" I told him to just call a cab for me, but he insisted. "Shut up, Natalie," I said, not looking at her. I took a sip of the whiskey. It burned, which was good. It kept me grounded. "Just shut up." Her mouth snapped closed, her eyes widening in shock. Julian's hand tightened on her shoulder. "Don't talk to her like that," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "After what you pulled tonight, making me choose?" She was bleeding. "Sienna." I turned to face them then. I leaned against the bar, crossing my ankles. She was bleeding? Still? After the 40-minute detour you took to play hero? Must be some wound. Did you stitch her up yourself? Or did you just use it as an excuse to skip the after-party? You're unbelievable. Julian spat. He shifted Natalie off him and stood up. He was taller than me, broader, and he used it. He stalked toward me until he was invading my space, his expensive scent mixing with the stale smell of rain and his own arrogance. She was terrified. Some psycho trucker was banging on her window. There was no trucker. "Julian," I said quietly. I called 511 while I was waiting for the state police. 95 southbound was clear between exits 19 and 21 all night, except for a minor fender bender at exit 20 at 10:15. No disabled vehicles. No reports of suspicious persons. Just you, her, and a very convenient lie. He flinched. Just a microsecond of a flinch. But I caught it. Natalie didn't. She was too busy looking wounded. "You checked?" Julian's voice dropped to a whisper, laced with venom. "You're keeping tabs on me now." "I'm keeping tabs on the facts." I corrected him. "And the fact is, you threw your wife out of a moving car on a highway to rescue a woman who didn't need rescuing. Again, she needs me," he said, jerking a thumb back at Natalie. "Unlike some people. She doesn't treat me like I'm an ATM with a pulse." I laughed. I couldn't help it. The sound was sharp, humorless. "An ATM? Julian, I pay the property taxes on this building. I pay the maintenance on your Bentayga. I pay for Natalie's little studio in Chelsea that she hasn't set foot in since February. You're not the bank. Honey, you're just the guy who signs the papers I put in front of you." His face went red. "You don't know what you're talking about. Your father's money is in a blind trust one haven't touched since I was 21. He lied smoothly. Eleanor had drilled this into me. Let him believe what he wanted about the source. The amount was the only thing that mattered. This money, the money that keeps this penthouse running and keeps your ego inflated, it's mine. All mine. Natalie stood up then, wrapping the robe tighter around her slender frame. She looked between us, her lower lip quivering. Julian, please, don't fight. This is all my fault. I shouldn't have called. I didn't know who else to turn to. Julian turned back to her, his expression softening instantly. He cupped her face in his hands. You did the right thing, baby. She's being difficult because she's not used to not being the center of attention. He looked at me over his shoulder. She needs a place to stay for a few days, until she feels safe again. I set my glass down on the bar with a soft clink. No. Excuse me? He turned fully, dropping his hands from Natalie's face. I said no. I repeated, she's not staying here. Get her a hotel. Get her an Airbnb. Hell, get her a tent. But she's not sleeping under my roof tonight. Your roof? Julian scoffed. He stepped closer again, lowering his voice so Natalie couldn't hear. His eyes were hard, cold. You're forgetting something. Sienna, you're forgetting who you're talking to. You're forgetting the terms of our marriage. The private terms. I raised an eyebrow. Enlighten me. He leaned in, his lips brushing the shell of my ear, his voice a venomous whisper. You owe me silence. Sienna, you don't want people asking where your money really came from, do you? You don't want them digging into your mother's affairs, into the real reason she left that trust to you instead of your father. You don't want the world knowing you're not the self-made woman you pretend to be. So shut your mouth, smile, and let me handle this. For a second, the old fear, the fear he'd carefully cultivated over 2 years, flickered. He was right. He knew things. He knew about the clauses in the trust, the ones that stipulated discretion. He'd used it before, hinting that if I ever stepped out of line, he'd make sure the Post had a field day with my family's history. But then I remembered the number on my phone screen. I remembered Eleanor's text. The release is signed. The assets are yours. Free and clear. He has no claim. None. I smiled. A real smile this time. Small, cold, and utterly devoid of warmth. Julian, I murmured back, matching his tone. You're forgetting something too. Our anniversary was 3 days ago. 2 years. Remember the prenup? The one you had your pit bull attorney's draft? The one that said after 2 years, certain assets become untouchable, irrevocable. He pulled back, frowning. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the fact that for the last 2 years, I've played the good little wife. I've stayed quiet. I've let you parade your mistress around our home and our social circles. I've let you threaten me with my own family's privacy. But that clock ran out 3 days ago. Julian, and you? You just threw away the one thing that might have protected you from what happens next. I walked past him, heading for the primary bedroom. I could feel his eyes on my back. Sienna, he called after me. Where do you think you're going? To pack, I said without turning around. Natalie can have the guest room, or the couch, or the floor. But I'm done sharing my space with her, and I'm done sharing my life with you. You can't just leave, he shouted. Natalie started crying again, louder this time. A practiced, theatrical sob. We have the gala tomorrow. The investors are flying in. You're my wife. You have obligations. I paused at the bedroom door, looking back at him. He looked unhinged. His hair was messy, his shirt rumpled, his face blotchy with anger. Natalie was clinging to his arm, her face buried in his sleeve. Obligations, I repeated softly. Funny word for it. I always thought they were called vows. But you broke those the second you opened that car door tonight. I went into the bedroom and closed the door. I didn't lock it. I didn't need to. I heard him yelling at Natalie, his voice muffled through the thick wood. See what you've done? Look at this mess. And Natalie's voice, high-pitched and wheedling. I didn't mean to. Julian, I swear. She's just so cold. I ignored them. I walked to the closet and pulled out a suitcase. I didn't pack much, just the essentials. As I folded a sweater, my phone buzzed on the bedside table. A text from Eleanor. Eleanor, the papers are filed. The separation is official as of midnight. He has no access to the primary accounts. The secondary accounts will freeze at 9 a.m. tomorrow. How are you holding up, darling? I typed back, my thumb moving over the glass screen. Me packing. He's threatening me with the trust, telling me to stay silent. Eleanor, let him. The more he talks, the more he incriminates himself. The gag order in the prenup is null and void. He signed it under false pretenses regarding your assets. You have the upper hand. Sienna, use it. I looked at the closed door. Through it, I could still hear Julian's voice, rising and falling, and Natalie's intermittent sniffling. They sounded like characters in a play I'd already walked out of. I finished packing and changed into dry clothes, black jeans, a simple white tee. I left the damp silk dress in a heap on the bathroom floor. Let them deal with it. When I opened the bedroom door, the living room was quiet. Julian was sitting on the couch again, nursing a tumbler of whiskey. Natalie was nowhere to be seen, probably hiding in the guest room, licking her wounds and plotting her next move. Julian looked up. The anger was gone, replaced by something that looked like uncertainty, maybe even fear. Sienna, he said, his voice rough, come sit down. We need to talk about this like adults. I slung my bag over my shoulder and walked to the elevator. I didn't look back. There's nothing to talk about. Julian, I said, pressing the call button. You made your choice. Now live with it. The elevator doors slid open. I stepped inside, just as they began to close. He surged to his feet, his face twisting. You'll regret this, he shouted. You'll come crawling back. You have nowhere else to go. I met his gaze, my expression blank. I have everywhere else to go. Julian, you just never bothered to look. The doors closed, sealing him in his gilded cage. As the elevator descended, I pulled out my phone and dialed Eleanor. She picked up on the first ring. Change of plans, I said, my voice echoing in the empty elevator car. I want the penthouse on Park, the one in my name, and I want the press release drafted. Not about the divorce, about the foundation, the one Mother wanted, the one Julian kept burying. Eleanor's low chuckle came through the line. It's about time, darling. Consider it done. And Sienna? Yes? Welcome to the war. I ended the call as the elevator hit the lobby. Ray was waiting by the front entrance, holding the town car door open. The sun was just starting to peek over the horizon, painting the skyscrapers in shades of gold and pink. Julian thought he'd won tonight. He thought he'd broken me on the side of a highway. But as I slid into the warm leather seat and the car pulled away from the curb, I realized something. He hadn't broken me. He'd just freed me. And in freeing me, he'd signed his own death warrant. Natalie could have him. She could have all of him, the ego, the temper, the lies. She could have the penthouse and the Bentayga and the mountain of debt he was too arrogant to see coming. I was done playing by his rules. I was done being silent. The highway went both ways, and I was just getting started. The invite came 3 days later, not to Julian, to me, hand-delivered by a bike messenger in a navy blazer who wouldn't hand it over until I showed him my ID. Ms. Sienna Hayes was embossed in gold on the heavy cardstock. Not Mrs. Julian Voss. Just me. Julian saw it on the console table when he stumbled in at noon, reeking of bourbon and whatever perfume Natalie was currently wearing. He'd spent the last 72 hours oscillating between begging me to come home and threatening to freeze me out of the Voss legacy. I'd spent those same 72 hours in the Park Avenue penthouse, on the phone with Eleanor, signing documents, and ignoring his texts. He picked up the invitation, his thumb rubbing over the gold lettering. "How the hell did you get this?" he asked, his voice still rough with sleep and whiskey. "Same way you got yours, I assume," I said, not looking up from my iPad. I was reviewing the preliminary budget for the Hayes Foundation. Eleanor had moved faster than I expected. a stamp, an envelope, a person who knows my actual name. He tossed the invite back onto the table like it had burned him. You're not going to this. It's bad enough you've moved out. If you show up at the Met Gala after party alone, looking like you're celebrating, I am celebrating. Julian, I said, finally meeting his gaze. He looked like shit. Dark circles, puffiness, a general air of unraveling. I'm celebrating my independence. And my name, which, as you can see, is not Voss. You're my wife. He snarled, stepping toward me. You have an image to maintain. Our image. You show up there without me, looking like some newly single socialite, and it'll tank the stock before the opening bell on Monday. I set the iPad down, slowly, deliberately. Our image. I repeated, let's talk about that image. Julian, the one you've been so carefully curating, the devoted husband, the self-made billionaire, the man who saved his struggling ex-girlfriend from a non-existent predator on I-95. Is that the image we're protecting? He flinched. There it was again. That tiny crack in the facade. You're never going to let that go. Are you? Let it go? I stood up, smoothing the front of my silk blouse. Julian, I haven't even started with that. The gala is just the beginning. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a fitting. I walked past him. He grabbed my wrist. Hard. His grip was bruising. You walk out that door, Sienna, and I'll make sure no one in this city ever takes you seriously again. I'll tell them you're unstable, that you're squandering your father's money, that you— I twisted my arm, using a move Eleanor's security detail had taught me last year. His grip broke. He stumbled back, surprise flickering in his bloodshot eyes. You'll tell them what, Julian? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. That you've been lying about your net worth for years? That your biggest development project is currently being propped up by bridge loans you can't repay? That your self-made empire is built on a foundation of sand and my signature on checks you never bothered to read? He paled. Actually paled. How? How do you know about the loans? I know everything. Julian, I said, I've always known. I just didn't care enough to stop you before. But now I care. So here's how this is going to work. I'm going to the gala. I'm going to the after party. And you're going to smile for the cameras. Shake hands with your investors. And pretend like your world isn't crumbling around you. Because if you don't, I'll start liquidating assets. Starting with the Hudson Yards project. And we both know you can't afford the penalties for early termination. He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. You wouldn't. Try me, I said. I turned and walked out, the sound of my heels echoing in the suddenly silent entryway. The after-party was at the Mark, specifically, in the penthouse suite that overlooked Central Park. I arrived alone, in a dress that cost more than most people's cars. Not that Julian had paid for it. I'd bought it myself that afternoon, along with the diamonds at my throat and ears. Jewelry from my own collection, not the Voss vault. I didn't wait for Julian. I didn't need to. I walked in, accepted a glass of champagne from a passing server, and let the room's reaction wash over me. The whispers started immediately. Is that Sienna? Alone? Where's Julian? What's she wearing? I ignored them all, making a beeline for the terrace. I found Natalie there, huddled near the outdoor fireplace with two of her painter friends. She was wearing a dress that looked suspiciously like one-eyed rejected for being too on the nose for a woman trying to play the victim. She saw me and stiffened. Sienna, she said, her voice syrupy sweet. I didn't expect to see you here. Without Julian. I took a sip of champagne. Why wouldn't I be here? Natalie, it's the party of the season. One of her friends, a skinny blonde named Chloe. Not my Chloe, snorted. Well, we just assumed you'd be home. You know, since Julian's been so busy consoling his real girlfriend. Natalie shot her a look, but there was no heat in it. She was enjoying this. The power play, the public slight. Consoling, I repeated, rolling the word around on my tongue. Is that what we're calling it now? I figured it was more like enabling. Or maybe just pity. Natalie's smile tightened. You've always been so cold. Sienna, Julian says you don't understand what it's like to struggle, to need someone. Struggle? I laughed. Natalie, the only thing you've ever struggled with is picking a lane. First it was photography, then it was mixed media. Now it's what? Performance art? Because this little scene you're staging? It's definitely a performance. Her cheeks flushed. You think you're so much better than everyone else, don't you? Just because you have Daddy's money. It's not Daddy's money, I said, cutting her off. My voice was calm, but it carried. A few heads turned toward us. It never was. And it's certainly not Julian's. But you wouldn't know that, would you? You're too busy counting the dollars he throws your way to notice the ones I'm quietly stacking. Julian appeared then, materializing from the crowd like a particularly unwelcome ghost. He looked marginally better than he had this morning, hairstyled, suit pressed, but his eyes were wild. He grabbed my elbow, his fingers digging in. What the hell are you doing? He hissed, dragging me a few steps away from Natalie and her friends. I turned my back for 5 minutes. And you're already causing a scene? Causing a scene? I looked at his hand on my arm, then back at his face. Remove your hand, Julian, before I remove it for you. He didn't. He leaned in closer, his breath hot with the smell of expensive scotch. You're embarrassing me. In front of the board. In front of her. Do you have any idea what this is costing me? It's costing you your pride, I said, which, as we've established, is vastly overinflated. Let go. Not until you apologize, he demanded. To me, to Natalie, to everyone here for dragging our name through the mud. I stared at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, deliberately, I reached up and peeled his fingers off my arm, one by one. His grip was weak, pathetic, really. Our name, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more weight than his shout. That's the problem. Julian, it's not our name. It's mine. Hayes. And you've been using it without permission for 2 years. I turned back to the group. Natalie was watching. Her eyes narrowed. Julian's board members were watching. Even the waitstaff seemed to be holding their breath. I raised my glass slightly, the champagne catching the light. Since we're clearing the air, I said, projecting my voice so the entire terrace could hear. I thought I should mention something. This suite, the one we're all standing in, the building itself, it's owned by the Hayes Family Trust, has been for 30 years. I inherited the majority stake on my 25th birthday. The silence was deafening. Julian's face went from red to white to a sickly shade of gray. Natalie's mouth fell open. I didn't know that. One of the board members, a man named Richard Finch, stammered. I thought Voss Capital held the lease. Voss Capital pays rent to the trust. I clarified, my smile cool, monthly, on time, usually, though lately, there have been some delays. Eleanor Vance is handling the delinquency notices personally. Julian finally found his voice. It was a strangled sound. Sienna, stop. You're talking nonsense. This is our building. I looked at him then, really looked at him, at the man I'd married, at the man who'd thrown me out of a car, at the man who'd threatened me, belittled me, and underestimated me at every turn. No, Julian, I said softly, it was never ours. It was always mine. Just like the company car you drove tonight, just like the apartment you're sleeping in, just like the reputation you're so desperate to protect. You've been living in my world, playing with my toys, and calling them yours, and I've let it slide. Until now, I stepped closer to him, invading his space the way he'd invaded mine so many times. You don't know who you're talking to anymore. Julian, you haven't for a long time, and you're about to find out exactly who I am. When the eviction notices start landing on your desk, when the credit lines dry up, when your self-made empire turns out to be built on my foundation. I turned to Natalie, who was staring at me like I'd grown a second head. And you, I said, you can have him. Enjoy the view from the cheap seats, Natalie, because once the dust settles, he won't even be able to afford the rent on your little studio. And when that happens, don't come crying to me. I'm done being your safety net. I drained the rest of my champagne and set the glass on a nearby ledge. Then I walked back into the suite, through the stunned crowd, and toward the elevator. I didn't look back. I could feel Julian's eyes burning holes in my back, but I didn't care. As the elevator doors closed, I caught a glimpse of him through the gap. He was standing frozen, surrounded by his peers, his mouth opening and closing silently. Richard Finch was already pulling out his phone, no doubt to call his broker. The doors slid shut, cutting off the view. I leaned against the mirrored wall, my heart pounding, but my hand steady. That was the first domino, and I'd just tipped it over. My phone buzzed. A text from Eleanor. Eleanor, heard the news. The board is in a panic. Finch just called me. They're calling an emergency meeting for Monday. How do you want to play it? I typed back, a slow smile spreading across my face. Me, let them panic. And Eleanor? Buy up any available shares of Voss Capital you can find on Monday. I want a controlling interest before lunch. Eleanor, consider it done. Darling, welcome to the takeover. I slipped the phone back into my clutch as the elevator descended. The city lights blurred past the glass. Julian thought he'd won when he drove away on I-95. He thought he'd broken me, but he'd only broken the chains. And now the highway was mine. All of it. The doorman didn't even bother calling up. He just met my eyes across the marble lobby of the Park Avenue building and gave me a slight, almost imperceptible nod. He's here. That was all it said. I'd instructed the staff 2 days ago. Julian Voss is not to be announced. He is not to be granted access. But if he forces his way in, let me know. Ray was right. He'd forced his way in. I stepped out of the private elevator onto the quiet hush of the penthouse floor. My heels didn't make a sound on the wide plank oak. The double doors to the residence were slightly ajar. I pushed one open. Julian was standing in the middle of my living room, surrounded by mid-century modern furniture that had arrived this morning. He looked like a bull in a china shop, if the bull was wearing a $3,000 Brioni suit and shaking with barely contained rage. Papers were scattered at his feet. My papers, the ones I'd left on the console, the preliminary share certificates, the transfer agreements, the ledger from Eleanor showing the daily acquisition of Voss Capital stock. He wasn't alone. Natalie was perched on the edge of a cream-colored sofa, looking around with poorly concealed envy. She'd never seen this place. Julian hadn't known it existed until today. You, Julian snarled, spinning around. His face was mottled, his tie loosened, his hair a mess. You locked me out of the apartment. You froze the Amex. And now I find this? He kicked at the papers near his feet. What the hell is all this? Sienna, I walked to the wet bar, ignoring him. I poured myself a glass of still water. My movements were slow, deliberate. I could feel Natalie's eyes tracking me, hungry and spiteful. It's called a domicile. Julian, I said, finally turning to face him. Look it up. It's where a person lives when they're not being publicly humiliated by their spouse on a highway. Publicly humiliated? He let out a harsh, disbelieving laugh. You're the one who made a scene at the after-party. Do you have any idea what you've done? Finch called me at 6 a.m. The stock is plummeting. Investors are jumping ship. And it's all because you decided to play sugar mama in front of the ton. The ton? I repeated, raising an eyebrow. Really, Julian? We're using Regency romance terms now. Maybe stick to real estate. It suits your grasp of reality. Natalie spoke up, her voice a syrupy whine. Sienna, please, can't we just talk? Julian's been so stressed. He didn't mean to leave you on the highway. Not really. He panics when I'm in danger. It's his protective instinct. I looked at her, really looked. She was wearing a dress that was at least 2 seasons old, trying to pass it off as vintage. Her nails were chipped. Julian had clearly stopped paying for the little things. His protective instinct. I echoed, right, the one that protects you by throwing me under the bus. Or in this case, leaving me on the shoulder. Tell me, Natalie, how much is he paying you these days? Or is it just room and board in exchange for the emotional manipulation? Her face hardened. The victim act dropped for a split second, revealing something sharp and greedy underneath. I'm not the one who married him for his money. Sienna. Oh, wait. Except it's not his money. Is it? It's yours. And you're just a bitter, frigid bitch who can't stand that he'd rather be with someone who actually appreciates him. Julian pointed a shaking finger at me. She's right. You've always been cold, distant. I come home and you're buried in spreadsheets, or on the phone with Eleanor, or just staring at me like I'm a bug under glass. Natalie needed me. She appreciated me. You just tolerated me. I set my water glass down. The clink sounded loud in the quiet room. Tolerated you. I repeated softly. Is that what you think happened here, Julian? That I tolerated you? I walked over to the scattered papers, crouching down to pick them up. I smoothed out a sheet, a recent transaction confirmation showing the purchase of another 2% of Voss Capital stock. I didn't tolerate you. I funded you. I enabled you. I watched you build a house of cards on top of my capital, and I said nothing because I thought maybe there was a man under all that bravado. I was wrong. I stood up, holding the paper out to him. Look at this. Really look. While you were busy protecting Natalie from phantom truckers, I was buying your company out from under you, one share at a time, quietly, efficiently, and now I own 37% of Voss Capital, more than you, more than your precious board. I am the majority shareholder. Julian's eyes scanned the document. I saw the exact moment the numbers registered. His breath hitched. His hand, the one holding the paper, started to tremble. You did this, he whispered. All of it? The loans? The bridge financing? The delinquencies? It was you? It was always me. I said, every payroll you made, every development you broke ground on, every glass of champagne you drank at those parties, it was paid for by me. I let you play businessman. Julian, I let you wear the crown. But the kingdom? It was mine. Natalie slid off the sofa, moving to Julian's side. She wrapped an arm around his waist, but he shrugged her off violently. Get off me, he muttered, his eyes never leaving my face. You planned this? From the beginning? I planned for contingencies. I corrected. You provided the catalyst. The highway was just the final straw. But this? I gestured to the papers. This started the day you signed a prenup you didn't bother reading. The day you assumed my silence meant consent. The day you forgot that I'm not just the woman you married. I'm the woman who owns the ground you stand on. He took a step toward me, his expression shifting from shock to pure, venomous hatred. You think you've won? You think this changes anything? I'll fight you. I'll sue you for everything. I'll tell the world about your mother's trust, about the clauses you violated. Violated? I laughed. Julian, the only violation here was your fiduciary duty to your own shareholders, which, incidentally, now includes me. And as a majority shareholder, I have a say in the direction of the company. My first order of business? Removing you as CEO. You can't do that, he roared. It requires a board vote. 60%. Does it? I tilted my head, feigning innocence. Eleanor's been very busy. Between the open market purchases and the private acquisitions from disgruntled minority holders, I'm fairly certain we're north of 65% by now. And Richard Finch? He's already privately indicated he'll support the motion. He's not fond of losing money. Julian, and you? You're radioactive. Julian's shoulders slumped. For a second, I thought he might actually cry. Then Natalie moved. She stepped between us, her earlier deference gone, replaced by a cold, calculating fury. Enough of this, she snapped, glaring at me. Then she turned to Julian, her voice dripping with contempt. I told you this would happen. Julian, I told you she was playing you. But you wouldn't listen. You were too busy basking in your own importance, thinking you were some big shot developer, when really you were just a kept man. Julian stared at her, stunned. Natalie, what are you saying? I'm saying I'm done, she said, smoothing her hair. Done with the lies, done with the secrecy, and definitely done with the sudden lack of funds. You're broke, Julian, or you will be by Tuesday, and I don't do broke. She looked at me then, and for a moment, the mask slipped completely. There was no jealousy, no rivalry, just a cold assessment. Enjoy your victory. Sienna, you've got yourself a bankrupt husband and a ruined company. Must be nice. She walked toward the elevator without a backward glance. Julian watched her go, his mouth opening and closing. When the elevator doors closed, he seemed to shrink. He sank onto the sofa Natalie had vacated, burying his face in his hands. Sienna, he mumbled, his voice muffled. Please, don't do this. I'll change. I'll cut her off. I'll sign whatever you want. Just don't take the company. It's all I have. I walked over to him, stopping a few feet away. I looked down at the man who had once seemed so large, so imposing. He was none of those things now. He was just a man who had mistaken my kindness for weakness, my silence for stupidity, and my love for a leash he could tighten whenever he pleased. You don't have it anymore, Julian, I said quietly. You haven't had it for a long time. I did this. Me. Not fate. Not the market. Me. Because you taught me that loyalty is a liability and love is a transaction. So here's the final transaction. I'm taking my assets back. All of them, including the ones you thought were yours. I pulled an envelope from my purse and tossed it onto the coffee table in front of him. Divorce papers. Standard terms. The prenup stands. You keep the debts. I keep the assets. Sign them. And I won't pursue criminal charges for the creative accounting you've been doing with the Hudson Yards escrow. He looked up, his eyes red and swollen. Criminal charges? Embezzlement. Julian. Misappropriation of funds. Eleanor's very thorough. The DA would love a case like this. It makes headlines. But I'm feeling generous. Sign the papers, and I'll let you walk away with your freedom and whatever dignity you have left. He stared at the envelope like it was a snake. And if I don't sign, then I'll drain you dry. I said, my voice flat. I'll call the board. I'll call the DA. I'll call the Times. I'll tell them everything. Not just about the money, but about the highway. About how you abandoned your wife. About how you prioritized your mistress over your marriage. And when I'm done, you won't just be broke. Julian, you'll be a cautionary tale. I turned toward the elevator. The choice is yours, but choose quickly. Eleanor's patience is thinner than yours. Sienna, he called out as I reached the elevator. His voice was broken. Small. Was any of it real? Did you ever love me? I paused. I didn't look back. I loved a version of you that never existed. Julian, the man I married died on I-95. And the man who killed him, you did. Goodbye. The elevator doors opened. I stepped inside. As they closed, I saw him lunge for the envelope, his fingers closing around it like it was the last lifeline he had. And in a way, it was. The doors shut, sealing him in his new reality. Mine was just beginning. I pulled out my phone, scrolling past the missed calls from Julian, from his lawyers, from Natalie. I found Eleanor's number and hit dial. He signed. She answered. He will, I said, watching the floor numbers descend. Get the press release ready. Hayes Trust announces acquisition of majority stake in Voss Capital. And schedule the board meeting for Wednesday. I want him gone before the weekend. Considered handled. Eleanor said. I could hear the smile in her voice. Welcome to the top, darling. Try not to let it go to your head. No risk of that. I murmured. I've always known exactly where I stood. Now he does too. The elevator hit the lobby. The doors opened. I walked out into the sunlight, leaving the wreckage of Julian Voss behind me. He'd wanted to save his ex. Instead, he'd lost everything. And I'd finally found myself. The highway went both ways. He'd driven off into the dark. I was driving into the light, and I wasn't looking back. The New York Times landed on the stoop of Chloe's Upper West Side brownstone at 7:02. I know, because I was sitting on the steps, waiting for it, not because I was anxious, because I wanted to see it in print before the rest of the city did. Page A19. Personal. Just a 4-line box. Nestled between a debutante's engagement announcement and a society matron's charity luncheon. To the man who left me on I-95 next time, check the rearview mirror. S.H. Simple. Elegant. Final. Chloe stepped out, mug of coffee in hand, and looked over my shoulder. Jesus. Sienna, she said, blowing on her latte. You really went for the jugular. Page A19? That's not a diss. That's a eulogy. It's not a eulogy, I said, folding the paper neatly. It's a receipt. She sat down beside me, nudging me with her knee. How's it feel? Official divorce day. The day you legally cease to be Mrs. Voss and go back to being, well, you. Feels like a Tuesday, I said, except on Tuesdays. I don't usually have a dozen reporters camped out on my block waiting to ask me if I feel guilty for destroying a self-made man. Do you? Guilty? I snorted. For what? Forcing him to face the consequences of his own actions? For reclaiming assets that were mine to begin with? No. Chloe, I feel clear, like I've been breathing through a straw for 2 years, and someone finally pulled it out. She grinned. Atta girl. So what's next? World domination. A new husband? A villa in the south of France? Coffee, I said, standing up. Then maybe world domination. The husband part is a hard pass. The villa? Possibly. But first, I've got a foundation to launch and a board to reorganize. Eleanor's already drafted the agenda for the Voss Capital shareholder meeting next week. We're renaming it Hayes Ventures. Subtle, but effective. Subtle, Chloe repeated, laughing. You're about as subtle as a sledgehammer. See, but I love it. So have you heard from him? I didn't need to ask who him was. He signed the papers yesterday. His lawyer emailed the executed copies at 4 p.m. I had Eleanor confirm the filing with the county clerk this morning. It's done. And Natalie? Last I heard, she was trying to sell her story to Page 6 for 20 grand. They offered her 5 and a byline. She took it. The piece runs tomorrow. My life with a billionaire, the lies, the loans, and the left turn on I-95. Very tabloid, very on brand. Chloe winced. Ouch. That's going to sting. He'll survive, I said, shrugging. Or he won't. Not my problem anymore. The trust cut him a final settlement, enough to clear his personal debts and keep him from homelessness for about 6 months. If he's careful, which he won't be, it's more than he deserves. But Eleanor insisted on the tax benefits. We walked to the corner bodega, grabbing 2 large coffees and a bag of everything bagels. We ate them on a bench in Central Park, watching the joggers and the nannies and the tourists. It was warm for early June, the kind of day that makes New York feel like it might actually be habitable. You know, Chloe said, licking cream cheese off her thumb. I keep thinking about that night. The highway. I don't think I've ever been as angry as I was when you sent me that text. I wanted to drive down there myself and run him over. I know, I said. I considered it, briefly, but then I realized he'd already done the job for me. He'd run himself over. He just hadn't realized the car was his own ego. She bumped her shoulder against mine. You're scary when you're zen. You know that? I'm not zen, I said. I'm just done. Done with the games. Done with the lies. Done with men who think my silence is a permission slip. We sat in silence for a while, watching a squirrel try to steal a pretzel from a sleeping tourist. It felt normal, peaceful, the kind of peace I hadn't felt in years. Do you regret it? Chloe asked suddenly. Any of it? Marrying him. Staying as long as you did. I thought about it. About the dinners I'd sat through, smiling at people I didn't like. About the nights I'd lain awake listening to him snore, wondering if this was all there was. About the way he'd looked at me sometimes, not with love, but with possession, like I was a trophy he'd won, not a person he'd chosen. Regret what? I said finally. That he showed me exactly who he was before I wasted another year? That he handed me the keys to my own freedom by being selfish enough to throw me out of a car? No, I don't regret it. I regret the version of me that let him get away with it for as long as he did. But that version's gone now, buried on I-95. And Natalie? She asked. Regret not warning her? Or maybe, I don't know, rubbing it in more. I laughed softly. Natalie got exactly what she wanted. Chloe. Him. And he got exactly what he deserved. Her. They're perfect for each other. Two parasites trying to feed off the same host, not realizing the host checked out months ago. Let them have each other. Let them have the drama, the debt, the desperation. I'm done being the stage they perform on. I pulled out my phone. A text from Eleanor. Eleanor, the press is running with the Times ad. CNN just picked it up. Voss, sorry. Hayes Ventures, stock is up 12%. The board is unanimously behind you. Well done, darling. Now, about that villa in Provence. I smiled and typed back, book it. 2 weeks, after the foundation launch. I looked up at the sky, at the patch of blue visible between the skyscrapers. Somewhere in Boston. Julian was probably waking up in a cramped apartment above a failing gallery. Natalie's complaints echoing off the thin walls. Somewhere else. Natalie was probably realizing that the trust fund boyfriend she'd schemed for was now just another broke artist she couldn't respect. And me? I was sitting on a park bench, eating a bagel, with a friend who loved me for me, not for my bank account or my last name. I was free, truly, utterly free. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the diamond ring Julian had given me for our anniversary. I'd kept it, not out of sentimentality, but because it was a reminder of what I'd almost let define me, of the price of silence, of the moment I'd chosen myself. I stood up, walked to the edge of the pond, and, with a flick of my wrist, tossed the ring into the murky water. It hit the surface with a tiny plop, then vanished. Damn, Chloe said, coming up behind me. That's a lot of carrots to just yeet into a pond. It's just carbon, I said, wiping my hands on my jeans. Overpriced, overhyped carbon. Like him. She laughed, linking her arm through mine. Come on, Scrooge McDuck. Let's go count your real treasure, the kind that doesn't come with a prenup. We walked away from the pond, away from the ring, away from the memory of Julian Voss. The city hummed around us, alive and chaotic and entirely mine. The highway went both ways. He'd driven away, chasing a ghost and a lie. I'd kept going, straight into the life I was meant to have. No rear view mirror required. And for the first time in a very long time, I liked the view